Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, it's been quite a year in Pennsylvania politics and government. This is our year-in review show with three of the state's leading journalists. Back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host.
Well, let me first start out by saying happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, whatever you want to celebrate. We hope that you and your family have a great holiday season. Well, it's our year-in review show. We do this every year. We get three of the state's top journalists together to bat around what happened in Pennsylvania politics over the past year and to look into the future. Joining me, as often is the case, are three of our regular contributors. Amy Worden from the Philadelphia Inquirer, John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call, I'll get that right, John, and Pete DeCoursey from Capitolwire. All right, Peter, let me start with you. Off the top of your head, give me three or four of the big news stories that you wrote about this year.
I think the biggest news story this year in politics and government is the loss of Rick Santorum.
Okay.
Unlike some people who lost because of things that happened this fall or mistakes they made in this campaign, Rick Santorum spent 12 years building toward this loss and lost by a stunning 59 to 41% after two terms in the Senate, and with people saying that he should run for president.
Yep.
He barely got 2/5 of the vote in Pennsylvania.
John, name one.
There's a bloodletting that's a close second to that. That's the May 17th primary.
Yep.
That saw the ouster of Senate President Bob Jubler, a majority of their chip right bill, and a dozen incumbent legislators. That was the dress rehearsal, as it turned out, for the fall elections.
Okay. Amy, give me one.
Reform. Stemming from the infamous pay raise, I think we saw the beginnings of a reform movement in Pennsylvania.
All right, now, by that, are we talking about things like reduce the size of the legislature, term limits, constitutional convention, the whole ball of wax?
All of the above. But you also saw them going back and addressing some lingering problems from sessions ago that have been hanging out there. Talking about lobbying reform, about gambling reform.
Yeah.
They actually did finally get.
All right, well, let's take each one of those up, and we'll chat a little bit about them. Let's take up Pete's idea about Rick Santorum. John, let me go to you. How big a story? I mean, this was a seismic event. You have an incumbent U.S. senator who goes down basically by 18 percentage points or so in a stunning defeat, the likes of which virtually unprecedented for a United States senator to lose anyway.
It's true. I mean, you got Santorum operating on one level as sort of the architect of his own political fate, but I'm placing him in a larger context as sort of as the poster child for what happened to Republicans nationwide this fall. Occasionally distanced himself from the White House, but tied himself to the Bush White House as well. Tried to use the war on terror as endgame rhetoric. Didn't work out for him. Was floundering much the way that Republicans were all over the country. Was getting killed by the war. Was getting killed by these various sort of anti-incumbent sentiments that were welling up. As they say, as goes the country, as goes Santorum, so goes the GOP.
Peter, as a segue into that, there is no doubt that Senator Santorum was in effect the de facto leader of the Republican Party in the state. I think you would agree with that.
Yes.
How much weaker is the Republican Party today as a result of what happened with Santorum's defeat? And as we tape this show, the Democrats in control of the state House. How much, and the loss of 4 congressional seats, how much weaker do you think the party is today, symbolized by Santorum's loss?
Oh, immeasurably weaker, because you're talking about a party that no longer has a majority of Pennsylvania members of Congress, which it thought it would have forever and boasted about, drew a plan to make it 2/3, and now they don't even have the majority.
Right.
They lost a House for the first time in 12 years. They lost a chamber, the State House. And the other thing is, Lynn Swann got 39% against Ed Rendell. Even Ed Rendell thought that kind of showing was so unlikely that he bet his son Jesse that he would buy him a $150,000 sports car if he did it, and now he's stuck buying the sports car. But so even Rendell thought he was safe, wagering half of his yearly income on a
Somehow I don't think Jesse's going to get the car. What do you think, Governor? We'll have to get him on here.
The Judge Rendell, Marjorie Rendell, the wife, is trying to figure out a graceful way out of that.
How to get out.
Because she makes half the money too.
Yeah, maybe a Matchbox version.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, one of those miniatures you put on there. We could buy one and send it.
So, nobody saw this coming. Even Rendell didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. And, I agree a lot with what John said. I think that a lot of this was sort of the anti-GOP thing, but a lot of this, as Amy said, was specific revulsion against what people in office were doing.
You want to add to that?
No, I think the issue is that that there's an identity crisis in the Republican Party right now, and the moderates are pushing back hard. They said, look at this election, that's proof positive that there are more moderates in this state, growing numbers, certainly in the Southeast, and they should have a larger voice in the party, and that's gonna.
And look how far they're willing to go to get there. They voted for Bob Casey. It's not like they voted for Arlen Specter
by
or Ed Rendell.
150,000 votes or something in the southeastern part in the Philadelphia suburbs.
And there's a basic sort of more logistic problem that's going on here as well. Rick Santorum raised a ton of money for the GOP.
Yeah.
He was an enthusiastic soldier. He was the guy who got the party machine moving and sort of helped the dollars to flow. The question now is who is going to step into that gap and keep the party strong now that they've lost such a powerful figure.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take up John's suggestion that the number of incumbents who lost in the May primary and this huge change in the state legislature has some real meaning as Governor Rendell begins his second term early in January. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. This is the Year in Review, Pennsylvania Politics and Government with Amy Worden, John Micek, and Pete DeCoursey, journalists all. All right, John Micek, let's go. Huge turnover in the Pennsylvania legislature, 1 in 5 new. This massacre that occurred on May 16, one of those dates that I think we'll remember.
Live in infamy.
Live in infamy, right. All right. How big a story was that and why?
Seismic, tectonic, huge, giant, enormous. Fill in your favorite hyperbolic adjective here. It's just not one of these things that happens. The Pennsylvania electorate is famous for being disinterested, and this year was obviously not the case. Fired up by anger over the pay raise, they turned out in droves and just literally threw the bums out. And the most obvious manifestation of that was Bob Jubileer, the president pro tem, longest serving in the body's history, and his number 2, Chip Brightbill, the majority leader from Lebanon County. When you have the two heads cut off the hydra like that, that's heavy duty.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I agree with John. You got to look at this. This was a half and half proposition. Half the people who were of the 55 or so who were leaving did so because of retirement, because they didn't want to face the voters.
Yep, that's exactly right.
The voters jettisoned the rest. For
that's
24 incumbents to lose re-election, either in the primary or the general election, is just unheard of. It doesn't happen in Pennsylvania. It hasn't happened in 30 years, not since people were getting, indicted in job lots.
Yeah, that's one way to get them out. They leave,
But, this is a huge story because, number one, John talked about how the Senate leadership has changed, but we're now in a situation where the House Speaker John Pergel has said that he may not stay in leadership if he can't stay Speaker. So you could have, in the period of 1 year, Jubileer, Pergel, and Brightbill all gone.
All gone.
And depending what happens as they try to win back the House.
Go ahead.
And then don't forget Vian.
Vian, of course.
Pardon me. Yeah, Mark Vian, another size of applause.
Giant one.
The brain of the House Democratic
Amy,
Caucus.
earlier you brought up, I think, an excellent point, and Peter, you wanted to comment about this identity crisis that the legislature or that the Republican Party is going through. Did you want to?
Yeah. What does a Republican in Pennsylvania now look like? Pat Toomey, a thoroughgoing conservative, lost to Arlen Specter in the 2004 primary. Rick Santorum got his hat handed to him, 59 to 41 this year. So right now there's a question of whether you can be a statewide uber-conservative in Pennsylvania, a Jesse Helms conservative, or whether the winning model now is a more moderate image, like an Arlen Specter, like Attorney General Tom Corbett, and that is an argument that Rick Santorum he'll probably call us and yell, because he hates the idea that conservatives can't win.
Conservatives can't win.
But his election suggests maybe they can't.
Look, go ahead.
No, I think
President Bush lost it here twice.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a major showdown at the Republican Party's annual semi-annual meeting in February, when you're going to have forces from both sides meeting in a pretty public way.
Is that the point you were making about the split between the conservatives and the moderates? And
yeah, I think both are talking about the need. Everybody's talking about the need to return to the core principles of the party. But I think that's where the diversion occurs. And you have some talking about the core values, core social values, and the social issues, the hot button issues, and then you have the other moderates talking about sort of sticking to the fiscal side of it. Keep spending down.
One of the things, John, that struck me is that the Democrats since 2000 have now won 9 of the last 12 elections, statewide elections, if you include the judgeships. And do you agree with your colleagues about this sort of identity crisis? That who are the authentic Republicans, and does it matter?
I think that's true. I mean, if you pay attention to sort of the online chatter, as I am wont to do, I mean, among the real grassroots conservatives, among the ones who've drunk the Kool-Aid, they're convinced that they lost because they hadn't, as Amy said, hadn't adhered to core values, which narrowly construed for them are this sort of socially conservative, fiscally conservative model. The election result suggests that's not the case. Senator Santorum. But what you have are the Democrats who are elected in guys like, say, like Pat Murphy or Joe Sestaker, not sort of like the classically liberal big L Democrats. You have very sort of socially moderate Democrats and sort of fiscally responsible Democrats. So you've had this, not a swing to the left so much as the pendulum returning
to the center,
which is so often the case.
All right,
also
go ahead quickly.
That's partly because when your party's desperate, you nominate people who can win. And when your party's successful, as Republicans have been, you nominate true believers.
All right, reform. It's been, in some ways, a tough year for reform in Pennsylvania. We're going to get into that subject after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers with Amy Worden, John Micek, and Pete DeCoursey, regular journalist contributors to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're doing our year in review. All right, Amy, I'm going to turn to you. Reform. We had, after the infamous pay hike of July 7, 2005, we had several organizations created, Clean Sweep, Operation Clean Sweep, Democracy Rising, Rock the Capitol, just to mention 3, and a whole series of reform agenda items thrown out on the table, picked up by incumbents running for re-election, picked up by challengers running against incumbents. Even Governor Rendell is now a reformer. Talk to us a little bit about this.
Well, I think there's no doubt that reform has, it's sort of been like a line in a fairy tale. I mean, something that always sounded good, but there was never anything behind it. Right, never anything going on behind it. It was a nice campaign promise. Well, finally, we're seeing actual reforms taking place. I mean, just in this year alone, you actually have some significant pieces of legislation to point to, and specifically lobbying reform. Finally, at long last, a reality. Now Pennsylvania is no longer the only state without a lobbying reform law. And then you had and gambling reform. They dealt with issues still lingering with the gambling bill. So.
All right, Peter, but they have a long way to go. I mean, Governor Rendell, and you all wrote this story just recently, came out with the things he wanted to do. I mean, reduce the size of the legislature and term limits. I mean, it's one thing to do lobbying reform. It's another thing to do the constitutional changes.
Take the power of redistricting away from the
that's right. Another reform. Go ahead.
I think it's going to be very hard for him to pass any of those things. 50 new members or 50 not. I mean, I just think it's going to be very difficult to pass any of those reforms, and I think one of two things will happen. Either the reform movement will sort of crest and fade away, or you'll see just a huge 2008 push, and then after that I think you might see I think we're still one election cycle away from getting the kind of constitutional convention you need to push a lot of those reforms. But I mean, one of the things that I thought was fascinating with those groups is if you look at those groups that you talked about and the others, there's a clear dichotomy. One group, Operation Clean Sweep, its founder, Russ Diamond, decided he wanted to basically use it to set himself up to run for governor. And once he did, it died.
Yep. It
just faded away, and it took him with it. And the other groups, which kept focused not on themselves, but on these issues, are still here and are still thriving.
Yeah. You agree with that?
I do. I think also, I mean, there are sort of two levels to reform here. You've got these broader sort of structural things like lobbying reform and term limits and reducing the size of the legislature. Going on underneath that, though, you also have sort of internal procedural things, which is what caused a lot of the revulsion over the pay raise in the first place. This idea that they were conducting their business in the middle of the night, foisting amendments on people without any proper notice. And now the new guys are in control, particularly in the Senate. Senator Scarnati, the new president pro tem from Warren County, is saying that he wants to change a lot of that MO, which is what caused people to get disgusted with the way business was conducted.
Right. And I think, and that's a really good, that's a positive sign that you're actually seeing the whole way of doing business changing. It not requiring legislation, but actually going back to really what they're supposed to be doing.
But you know what's sort of surprising? That it's likely if they changed the process, if they were more open, if they agreed that they wouldn't put bills up at 2 in the morning, if they agreed that before they voted on these things, you all in the press corps would have these, to be able to write the stories about them before they actually voted, I don't think it would change very much anyway. Would it change the substance if they were more transparent? I don't think so. Do you?
Yeah, I do, and here's why. I think that so many of these bills have surprises in them and have things thrown in to give, $10 million to this. There's the example of the bill that got, the Comcast $40 million got thrown into at the last minute. Even after all this reform stuff, they threw the liquor for racinos in at the last minute. The fact is that there are a bunch of ideas and leaders will tell you this, that if you don't do them fast, you don't get them done at all.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think the real question here is how effective will it be if they really do wait 2 days after they? I mean, I think what you'll see is that these guys will try it for 6 months or a year. Then they'll discover that the reason Purgell and Jubileer and Vion did it the way they did it was because it's the most easiest way on the leaders to pass it.
All right, when we come back, final segment, Governor Rendell, prospects for a second term after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Builders Association, building today for a better tomorrow, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Okay, Governor Rendell, here we are. His last term, very ambitious agenda. John, let me start with you. Republican legislature, more conservative, certainly in the Senate, much more so in the House. Go through what the governor intends to do, and we can then talk about the prospects.
It'd be a shame if he was less ambitious.
Pretty ambitious.
He laid out a pretty extensive menu the other day, as my friends here will tell you. He's talking about child health care, about expanding access to health care, all these structural and legislative reforms that he wants to do. It's not a second term that he's taking lying down.
Yeah.
Who knows? If we base it purely on past record, the governor got 6 or 7 of the main things he wanted to get accomplished in one form or another. I don't know that he'll be as successful this second time out, but I'm not underestimating either.
Peter?
It's very ambitious. There's all kinds of things he's trying to do, like put ethanol in all gasoline that will make western Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania go crazy, as they did under Governor Bob Casey when he tried a similar mandate with MTBE years ago. There's just all these things are dauntingly huge. I think make some progress on health care, because health care, as he said himself and as Republican leaders say, is a huge issue. Everybody knows you have to do something. The question is, what will that look like? But on some of these other things, I think he's bit off a lot more than anybody can chew.
Actually, Pete brings up a good one on the alternative energy front. That's front and center in his will be in his second term, has been pretty prominent in his first term. He wants Pennsylvania to be a leader, and what a legacy! You know, if he's able to leave the coal state
with
Pennsylvania as a leader in not only in alternative sources of power, but reductions in emissions from power plants. I mean, if he can make any headway in that, and he has made.
All right, now none of you mentioned.
That's a good example, though, because on the coal to gas, he only got this far, and he's still waiting to open the first plant. With Rick Santorum working heroically in Washington and pushing the Bush administration, come on, we got to do coal to gas. Now he's lost Rick Santorum as his partner on the coal to gas plant in Schuylkill County. He wants to have 8 to 12 by the end of his term. We're still waiting for 1.
Yeah. All right. None of you mentioned. I thought you might mention. Maybe we didn't think about it. The mass transit and highway fund problem. They've been borrowing money from the highway fund. Something like $400 million, John.
Yep.
Where does that all go?
That's the other huge, gigantic thing that's going to be looming out there. Governor Rendell this month, we're in December here, he put out expressions of interest for privatizing some or all of the Turnpike's operations, or to sell it outright, in order to dodge the kind of or at least mitigate some of the massive tax increases that might be required to fund higher reconstruction and mass transit.
We don't have a lot of time left, but we want to take a moment here and say a few words about the former Governor Schaefer, who died within the past week or so. Amy, you wrote some of the stuff about him. What do you think? Governor Schaefer died. What is he most remembered for?
Well, he had a major impact on the way the government operates in Pennsylvania. He orchestrated a constitutional convention, the first in a century, in 1968, that resulted in, among other things, the unified judicial system, set up the 2-year cycle of the legislature, and allowed governors to run for 2 terms.
We got about 30 seconds. What about the taxes? He also got in trouble over taxes.
The father of the state income tax, the John the Baptist of the income tax in Pennsylvania.
All right, thanks for watching another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Happy holidays again, and everybody stay well.